before. You know, had a magical week last year, and kind of went down to New Orleans with not a lot of expectations again. Didn't know what the fishery was going to be like, and got down there, and lo and behold, I was able to make it really happen, and it was pretty darn awesome to be able to get to do it. A lot different circumstances from last year to this year. We were in Birmingham, water was real cold, I mean really cold, and the bite was tough, and I caught him with a red-eye shad on a crankbait. This year, exact opposite conditions. We had cold conditions in practice, and lo and behold, for the first time ever in a Bassmasters Classic, I show up, and actually the weather gets better. Usually if you want to have, if you got, a drought, or, you need some rain, or, you need some water in an area, all you got to do is put a Bassmaster event in your town, and we'll help you out. I mean, it always rains, we always get terrible, nasty weather, but for some reason, I think Mother Nature decided that New Orleans had had enough in the past several years with all the hurricanes and the oil spill and that, and we just had the perfect scenario. We went down there, and the way that our tournaments, or the Classic is set up, is it's off limits for a month. I mean, a whole month beforehand, and then for that one event, we are off limits from December. So if you wanted to scout the lake, you had to go there before the beginning of December of the year before. And I haven't been down there in 7 or 8 years, and I decided not to go down there to pre-scout. It's a vast area. The Mississippi River dumps into the Gulf down there, and it's all marsh and oil canals and lots of grasses, lots of hydrilla and milfoil, and it's shallow water, muddy bottom, everywhere, but it's just great bass. I mean, there's literally thousands and thousands of square miles of water that we have open to fish it for us. I kind of knew the general lay of the land, and I decided not to go and pre-scout. And when I got down there the first day, I thought I was just back at home. It was the first morning of practice. It was 28 degrees. I'm driving out in these canals out of the marsh. I went right to the area where I won in 2001 down there. I had to go back and see what it looked like. And, it's about 90 miles west of New Orleans. And I went there and I ran into a few canals, and it was really, the water was super low. It was really muddy there. I mean, it was super muddy. I mean, like chocolate milk. And I shut down on the first canal that had a little bit clearer water, and I looked at the waves, and I mean, the canals are like 40 yards wide, and there was ice all along the shore breaking from my boat base. I'm like, oh, this is not good. These bass down here don't ever get conditions like that. Dropped my trolling motor, water temperature was like 43 degrees, so here we go again, And, so practice started out pretty tough. Without a doubt, they're Florida straight largemouth down there, and they don't like the cold. The very first stop that I made, I picked up a crankbait rod with red-eye shad in it, right out the center of the canal. I made about 10 casts, and I kind of yo-yoing that bait, just the same cast I did the year before. Boom! I catch one, a good one, about a 3-pounder, and I said, man, it's going to be all right. Well, about 2 hours later, I had another bite, checked about 6 or 8 more canals, and I knew it was going to be tough. So really what I spent my practice time doing was looking for water that I thought had the potential to, have all the right ingredients for a big population of fish to be at during the spring of the year. What I had going for me is the Weather Channel. I could watch the Weather Channel and see that the following week, when the Bassmasters Classic was actually the actual competition days, we had a forecasted big warming trend. And the other thing is the first competition day of the Classics on Friday happened to coincide with it being the full moon on Friday. That tells me a lot when I'm, in the spring of the year like that. You're in a place that's been cold all winter down there. These fish typically, if the weather's nice, we'll start spawning in February down there. So I knew the full moon was coming. I knew we had a warming trend coming, and I was just looking for good areas. When I went into Lake Kanawhatchee, which is the area that I ended up winning the tournament in, I saw everything that I needed to see. First off, as I got to the west end of that lake, I was driving across a flat that's 5 foot deep with my boat, and I'm looking at my sonar, and it's just pure hydrilla. There's coots everywhere. It's just grass for miles. Thousands and thousands of acres of hydrilla at the main lake, 5-6 foot of water. Perfect place for bass to winter. Perfect place for a lot of bass to be able to live. A lot of great habitat there. And when I got back to the west end of the lake, where it's a little more protected, I stopped in this flat, and I made a little pass through there. The water was pretty low, and with my polarized glasses, I could see these black spots out there in the water. Well, I drove through there, and lo and behold, I got lucky and didn't hit any of these stumps. But when I shut down and looked at, I had my side imaging running, I saw all these stumps and this huge bay. There's a bay that's a mile and a half wide, and it's like an old cypress swamp that's flooded, just stumps underneath the water. Now, the water is pretty dirty, so you couldn't see down very far, but, as soon as I started idling, I started going over with my boat, I started bumping these stumps. So I knew this area right here. It's got a giant area to winter the fish out from it with a ton of grass and a big spawning bay full of stumps. Well, the water temperature is real cold. I fished in there in practice for, a couple hours, never got a bite. Never had a bite. I cranked, I flipped, I spinnerbaited, I did all that, never got a bite. To me, that area had a lot of potential. So we get one practice day, the Wednesday before the classic actually starts, and I went right there first. It's about 15 minutes from the boat ramp. A lot of guys are running to Venice, which is 125 miles away, 2 hours one way. Bayou Black, again, it's an hour and 20 minutes one way. That's where I won in 2001. With the conditions we had, I knew we'd have a good chance to have a lot of fog. So, I wanted to have a place close, and this area had a lot of potential. Well, I fished over there on that Wednesday practice day, and the water temperature was in the low 50s in the morning. I fished around for a little while, and I did not feel good at all. One thing that happened to a lot of us down there is a bunch of anglers got the flu in New Orleans. That day I had the flu so bad. It's a practice day for the BassBaby Classic, and I'm taking a nap on this deck of my Z9. I mean, I had to lay down like 3 or 4 times for 15, 20 minutes. People were looking at me, well, man, he must be in really bad shape because he's just standing there laying in the boat. But, I fished for a while in the morning, did the best I could, and never had a bite. I ran to some other canals and stuff like that, waiting for it to warm up a little bit. And I came back that afternoon, and in about an hour and a half's time, I had 3 bites. The first bite that I got was about a 2.5 pounder, and I caught it on a little square bill crankbait. And that water being cold like that, I was reeling it real slow, and I bounced it off the stuff and caught that bass, and I said, well, that's a good sign. That's the first bite I had in the area. Well, a little while later, I was experimenting with some different baits, and I just tied on a spinnerbait and just started slow rolling out there in those stumps, and man, I got a bite. And I had some boats around me, so I didn't really want to jerk too hard on it or pull on it. I did, and I kind of fogged around so nobody could see, and I reeled up the boat, and it was a bass about like this and about that big around. It was like a 9-count. And I said, that's what you want to see. That's what I knew this area had the potential for. So I fished around a little bit longer. I put a little 2-minute tubing over my spinnerbait hook. About 10 minutes later, man, I had another one just like that, and I just held him on there. He wouldn't let go. I had tubing over the hook, couldn't hook the fish. And I said, and he's pulling, and he's a big old boil. I never saw it, but I mean, that's another great big one right there. I GPSed that one too, and I said, this is where I'm going to start on Friday morning without a doubt. And the rest of the week from there was pretty special. I started out in the morning, and the first morning I started with a spinnerbait. I love to throw a spinnerbait for pre-spawn bass. When the water's like that in the low to mid 50s, and they first start to move up in the shallows, and I'll tell you, you live up here in the north where I live in Michigan, right after ice out, and you get a big jump in that water temperature, and those bass move right into the shallows right away, meaning they're going to go to places that warm up quick. This area that I was in, there's a lot of grass, a lot of stumps, and everything here is dark bottom. And that's exactly what I look for in the spring up north, is if you can go into a marsh area where there's cattails, or lily pads, or rocks, or stumps, something dark bottom, that's going to warm up first. And especially you got to get where there's no current. Down here in the Delta, there's a lot of tidal influence. So you don't want to be near the main chutes or the main passes where current goes back and forth. You want to get as far away from current as possible. So if you want to start out here and fish out on the river, you want to get in the backwaters. You want to get in the little marina harbors, things like that, where there's no current beginning of the year. And that's what this area was exactly what it had. But the first morning, foggy as heck. We had a 2-hour fog delay. Kind of played right in my hands again. The guys went to Venice. Boy, they're looking at their watch, sitting there at the boat ramp. Oh my God, can I make the run and take it back? I knew that I'd have a good amount of time to fish there. I was the first boat out. One of the great things about winning the year before is that it gets you automatically boat number 1, So I was the first boat out. I was the first boat there. I shut down in the fog, and started getting towards where my little waypoint coordinate was at when I caught the 9-pounder, and I hear boats running behind me, some more boats coming. I mean, I didn't throw 4 or 5 casts like that right off the bat, and I caught like a 4.5-pounder. Right, and when that fish bit it too, it was like, I mean, it's a spinnerbait bite like you really want to have, you know. And I knew, I turned around on the camera, and you're watching, if you watch the show tomorrow, that's the first fish that I caught. You'll see it. I'm like, boys, that's how you want to start it. And in my mind, I knew right then that I'd have a really good chance to win the tournament. I mean, when you see a fish that aggressive after what I saw in practice, and looking at that depth finder, as soon as I dropped my trolling motor, the water temperature was 7 or 8 degrees warmer than what it was on the Wednesday that I was there before. You got warming conditions. It's a full moon that day. And I mean, the bass are controlled by that moon. They spawn on the moon. It triggers waves of fish to spawn. Just the same way that that deer are going to run in the fall. You know, you can mark it on your calendar that the deer are going to run at the same time of the year every year. And bass pretty much do the same thing. They are cold-blooded, so the water temperature has to be somewhat close to that range. But believe me, the water temperature doesn't have to be 65 or 74 to spawn. If that moon is full, they're going to be in spawning areas even when the water's 50 degrees. But right off the get-go, you know, the water temperature is 56, 57 degrees in the morning. Caught that big one right off the get-go. A couple minutes later, I catch another one. Aaron Martins pulls up right behind me in the fog. I mean, literally from me to this boat right there. And he had obviously found the same fish. I saw him in practice. He was there too. I saw Scott Rook, who's my roommate. He was fishing right there. I mean, everybody all pulled up. We're all within a cast of each other. Aaron goes out and catches 2 4-pounders back to that kind of spinnerbait. And you know, the other guys come. There's a bunch of spectator boats and a bunch of BassBaby boats. And it didn't take long for these fish to really shut down. It was foggy at first, and we didn't know where we're at. There's boats everywhere running all over the fish and everything. I caught 2 or 3 real quick. Aaron caught 2 or 3 real quick. And then it kind of got slow. And you know, I fished out there for a while. I kept slow rolling that spinnerbait. The sun got up, and burned the fog off, and I knew that the bass would be getting more aggressive. You know, the moon's full that day, and what happened is they started to bump that spinnerbait. What's really amazing is all these guys saw it, and we tried to start to experiment with things. Once I caught my 5 that day, and I had 5 pretty good ones, I said, you know, I know that it's going to change. I'm going to have to try something different to get these fish. They're wanting to spawn. They're acting funny. They're just pumping the spinnerbait. I've got to try a different lure. So I started fishing jigs around a little bit, and some plastics, some creature baits, things like that. Didn't get any bites. And you know, the area is, again, it's just a big open flat. It's got stumps. Probably there's probably not an area out there where there's not a stump within 20 foot of the next one. But because the water's dirty, literally you couldn't see this far down. You can't see the stumps. And it's all pretty much the same depth. There's a little bit of variance here and there, and I was keeping a close eye on my electronics to look for areas that might be a little shallower or deeper. But basically, you were fishing with your bait to feel those stumps. And you know what? You bump one with a spinnerbait, and that's usually when you can get a bite. So if I bump the stump, I throw my spinnerbait back out there again, try to get it again. I cast a jig around for a while, couldn't get him to eat it. That day, I probably had 20 bass bite that spinnerbait and not eat it, just bump. And they'll do that. When they're thinking about spawning and not eating, they'll do that a lot. And I knew in my mind I had to bump with something that they bite. So when we bump that spinnerbait, I had a jig right there ready to go. I'd fire it right to that spot. No. Every time. I mean, I did it time and time again. Never got one to eat a slow moving bait. You know, when bass is spawn, what do you throw? You throw a jig, you throw a worm, you throw a single, you throw something. Soft plastic, right? You slow down. These fish wouldn't eat it.